Good afternoon, it's Patriot Smoothie here at the lunch break of day 20 of the trial for Tamara, Lich, and Chris Barber. Today we are hearing testimony from OPS officer Nicole Bach. She's with the PLT, the police liaison team, and she's testifying in court. She is the main person who had contact with Chris Barber during the convoy. So there's a lot of information coming out today. Now, with the police witnesses, we get a lot more specific information than, say, with the civilian witnesses. We get dates, people who were there, very specific information, which is both, I guess, a good and a bad thing. It's good that we get more to talk about and specific information, but it's bad because that specific information kind of overwhelms me when I'm sitting in the courtroom trying to get a good picture of everything happening with very detailed notes. Then I have to come outside and just throw this summary together. So it's harder for some things that aren't immediately obvious to stick out. Now, I do have one thing concerning Justin Trudeau, a comment that was made and a court decision on that comment that Barber made to this officer. But other things that this officer talked about was Barber's communication. There was a situation where Barber was on a conference call with Officer Bach, and there was two of them on the other side, and this other person was ranting and raving about something, but the court was basically not interested in hearing what the other person had to say unless it was directly linked to Barber, which sounded like it wasn't. And we went through the days, I believe, starting in early January, going through January 31st, February 1st, February 4th, February 8th, and the Crown would start by, because we're in examination in chief right now with the Crown, and the Crown would start by asking, do you remember a conversation you had on such a date with Chris Barber? No, off the top of my head, I don't. Okay, well, look at the notes at section whatever, and she'll refresh herself. At one point, she was refreshing herself with her notes, and the defense was saying something, and the judge basically said she can't basically be reading her notes like that. She needs to say what she is reading to the court. The Crown said, well, she's entitled to read her notes. The judge is like, yes, but she needs to say what she's reading. She then said what she was reading, but there's again that highlight of how focused Justice Heather Perkins McVeigh is on running a fair trial here, on giving all parties the best possible chance to have fairness. And I'm sorry, I don't know what that is in the background, but to try to have fairness and to keep this thing on the rails, no matter who it is. Now, there was multiple objections from Magus. There was even an exchange between Greenspun and the Crown at one point. The Crown was handing something up to the witness, a hard copy of something, and the defense, I didn't catch what Greenspun said, but the Crown basically said, give me a sec or something like that. And Greenspun rose and said, don't tell me to give you a sec when you're handing out documents in the court and not saying what it is, essentially is the exchange that happened there. So there's a lot of, I don't want to call it tension, but there's definitely a lot of adversarial confrontations happening in the courtroom. Respectfully, the judge maintaining that middle line very well. As I said, I believe she is doing a phenomenal job of keeping things fair. We also heard, Officer Bach testified about how she would drive around on February 1st and February 2nd, took notes of streets on different days, counts of vehicles. She also, before the convoy, I believe January 29th, went to Arnprior, went to the old Antrim truck stop, gas station she called it, and also upon being prompted by the Crown for what else she might have remembered, she remembered going to the old Arnprior airport as well, counting vehicles there from the Western convoy. She gave the numbers of those figures at the time that she recorded. She also talked about how there was lanes blocked on February 1st and 2nd when she did these drives, I guess she said. There was lanes blocked on Kent, on Wellington, a lot of openness, a lot of things about messaging that the PLT teams had with protesters. She talked about, and the judge clarified, what do you mean by messaging? They're basically conversations that they're having with protesters. That's when they say messaging, that's what they mean. About messaging she had with people on different intersections on Wellington, she described that they were unwilling to cooperate with police in general, that they didn't want to, she was basically explaining to them that they were not to move back into the areas that had been previously vacated by trucks, that those areas were not to have to be replaced, and that they were unwilling to basically do that. She also described another incident, I believe also on Wellington from that same day. Again, guys, probably about 15 different dates thrown in the courtroom right now, so I can't get you the specific dates of these. If you want this, again, as always, the place for the details is my X coverage. That's the place to go for the play-by-play in the courtroom. But she talked about an incident on Wellington that happened the same day as the first thing we were talking about, where the people were more combative, I think, and there was she described a verbal altercation with police. She described the people, that there were problem trucks on the SJAM, the Sir John A. Macdonald Parkway, I believe west of Booth, where trucks who wanted to be, quote, closer to the action were creating problems. Even Chris Barber, according to this officer's testimony, identifying two specific so-called problem trucks that they were having issues with. So an example, in my opinion, of Barber attempting to keep communication open with police and to keep the goodwill there. Barber, according to Bach's testimony and her notes, on multiple occasions saying that this wasn't going to go away, the protest, that they were waiting for acknowledgement. Now this came during the voir dire, because now we are in a voir dire. Forgot to mention that. That's interesting. Save it for the end. But different comments from Barber about, basically that they needed gas, that there was trucks with children in it that were running out of gas. A lot of discussions between Officer Bach and Barber about how to strategize, as she put it, towards what the convoy was going to look like, towards getting gas and supplies, and how the convoy would be moving things in, because again, as he said, there was children in some of these trucks and that they just weren't going to go away. Also discussion, I believe, around the 8th of February when Barber moved his truck out to a, quote, secret location. Bach testifying that she asked Barber where he moved his truck out of town. She did know that he did inform her that he moved out of town, and that he replied to a secret location that she was never able to learn. She previously knew the truck to be on Wellington Street, but I don't think she said she observed it. At least she wasn't asked if she did. But again, remember that the Crown, she's constantly being asked questions. She does not recall, and then the Crown's asking her to go to her notes. And in some ways, Magus maintains in her objections that the Crown is asking leading questions, that they are asking, basically fishing for the answer they want in the question that they're putting to this witness. And so there's been several objections to that regard. We also had the incident with Greenspun I described earlier. And basically, I didn't tell you, but the Crown said that they've disclosed everything digitally, and their understanding is when they've disclosed things digitally, they don't make a hard copy available in court. So they had a copy for the witness to look at, I think of 9 pages of text, and they had a copy for the court to look at, for the judge, but not for the defense. And the defense is basically like, can you give us a copy, because there's a tremendous amount of digital disclosure, can we just look at the same thing? And then they said, and then the Crown said, well, no, whatever. The judge then asked the Crown to say, please provide that, and then the Crown's, in a rather, with a certain response, said, okay, well, we expect the same courtesy from the defense. The defense is like, well, we've basically been giving that. And I can recall testimony in court here. Every time the defense has had something and they're providing it, I can recall them handing it to the Crown. So they've been doing that, in my opinion, in what I've regarded, that the defense is constantly handing material to the Crown. Assumedly, this is all already, as the Crown was saying, has been digitally disclosed, but they're handing hard copies as well, making sure everyone's on the same page. That's been my observation so far. We also had other discussions, interesting discussions. I can't really recall at this time, but we are in a voir dire because there was a discussion where Barber allegedly said something about Justin Trudeau. I think he said that he wanted to be acknowledged by him and that there needed to be action. And the court is basically asking, the objection by Magus is it's not relevant. And the judge basically seemed to sort of agree with that, saying, what does Barber's political opinions have to do with, I believe the Crown alleges it has something to do with count 5 of the information, which is obstruct highway to intimidate government agent and persons or employees, which includes the Prime Minister. And then the judge basically saying, how does Barber's political opinion of one leader or the other have anything to do with that, the charges? And the Crown maintains it has something to do with count 5. Magus said, yeah, not really. And so now we have entered into a voir dire basically just before the break. So we're in a trial within a trial where this specific information is in the voir dire context and won't be admittable to the context at large, to the trial at large, until we deal with this. Originally, there was going to be some scheduling issues with Officer Nicole Bach, but it seems we have that sorted. We will come back. We're having a late lunch today because we started late. Greenspun had a matter this morning, so we're going to be coming back at 2:30, and it sounds like Officer Bach will be testifying from 2:30 to 4 at the end of the day, which will allow us to complete her portion maybe, or at least get a significant portion through her. We're still in chief examination with the Crown right now. The defense has not been able to cross yet, but I'm assuming there's going to be a lot of interesting questions based on some of the things we're hearing in court today about the comments with the Prime Minister if it gets into the trial at large in the voir dire right now, where he, again, those comments being that he wanted acknowledgement and action from the Prime Minister on these issues. On the issue of being heard as a protest. That's something that he allegedly had said to Bach, and that she noted in her conversation. She, in her PLT logs in the Signal chat, basically explained that, the PLT is on deployment at a scene. They make their notes via Signal. There was a conversation that, again, she's having a lot of trouble recalling this, but she's saying those notes were made in a timely fashion via Signal, and some of them made in her actual duty book notes, I assume, is what they mean by her notebook, and then a couple of phone calls and text messages. Before we go, one more really interesting thing. She was talking about her text messages, and basically the material in court, I believe it was those 9 pages, are text messages captured from Mr. Barber. I think Magus said the name of the program that uses some intelligence program that captures text messages, I assume, but it was captured from Mr. Barber's device provided to the court that way. So the judge was basically asking, have you looked at this and compared it to the originals to see if they're the same? And then The witness, Officer Bach, testified that no, shortly after convoy, her device was wiped because they were having a system-wide IT upgrade, and that there has been no attempts, to her knowledge, to recover that information. So that's where we are at the lunch break here on day 20 of a trial with no clear end in sight. I'm Patriot Smoothie.